Hi, everybody. This is Nick Zembylas. I'm the editor of Educational Theory, and this is another in a series of interviews with authors who have published papers in the journal. Today's guest is Michalinos Zembylas, and we'll be discussing his paper, The Affective Dimension of Epistemic Injustice. So Michalinos, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for the invitation, Nick.
Sure, of course. So let's get started right away. Why does epistemic injustice need an affective dimension?
Well, it needs because affect always is an important dimension of the epistemic. So what I try to do in this paper is to examine how the affective element emerges from the harm, from the epistemic harm that is always inflicted on the knower. So the affective always goes together with the epistemic. At least that's what I'm trying to argue in this paper.
Okay, say a little bit more about the harm that's done in epistemic injustice and how that's experienced by people, maybe particularly in educational contexts.
Right. So I think it's useful to first define, epistemic injustice. When we say epistemic injustice, we mean the injustice faced by individuals in their capacity as knowers. So affective injustice is the injustice faced by individuals in their capacity as affective beings, the damages and harms that one experiences in their feelings. For example, my anger against racism or discrimination is refused uptake, and so it does not. It's not taken seriously. If you take the Black Lives Matter movement, and the anger or that's expressed against racism, when it's not taken seriously, then this is an example of affective injustice. So we cannot think of epistemic injustice like separately from affective injustice. So this is the point that I'm making in the paper. And what I'm saying is that we need to examine how pedagogy may actually help disrupt, in a way, the affective injustice that is entailed in epistemic injustice.
I understand. Let's look at the other word in that phrase, injustice. So you've talked about affective harm that people suffer, and I think we can understand the hurt feelings, the anger, the frustration that people feel in those situations caused by injustice. But what does the word affective injustice add to the notion of affective harm?
Okay, well, I think it's probably useful also to define, affect. So in general, there are many debates in the literature, in many disciplines about affects and emotions, and there are basically two major theories, affect theories. One of them makes a distinction between them, a sharp distinction between them. And the other theory is that a distinction between a sharp distinction between affects and emotion is not productive. So my position in this paper is I'm drawing on the version of affect theory by feminism and new materialism, specifically Sarah Ahmed and other theorists in this area, that avoid making a rigid distinction between affects and emotion. Now, this has also theoretical implications in terms of how we understand epistemic injustice and affective injustice. We don't want to make sharp distinctions between the two, because then we run into all kinds of theoretical problems. So what I'm saying is that the affective and the epistemic are basically entangled, and so we cannot understand the epistemic without looking at the affective lens, and vice versa. So it's not theoretically or politically useful to make a sharp distinction between these two. It doesn't mean that we don't study the affective or the epistemic individually, but making a sharp distinction and drawing sharp theoretical or political lines between the two is not productive.
Yeah, that's useful. So let's talk about this two-way relationship. So I think it might be apparent to people how epistemic experiences have an affective component, the joy of discovery, for example.
Right.
I had a friend and colleague in graduate school who always argued the other part, that affect also has an epistemic dimension that we don't often appreciate. So how does the arrow work in that direction? In what way does affect have an epistemic component?
Well, it has an epistemic. In fact, there are many philosophers who argue this way that, for example, take anger, the knowledge that we drive. Anger is sometimes an evaluative emotion or affect. So it provides knowledge about a situation. Anger at injustice provides knowledge about injustices of various forms, epistemic, affective, or other forms of injustices. So I think your friend is right in terms of arguing in both ways. And the moment we try to draw very sharp distinctions between these two and say this is the territory of affect or this is the territory of the epistemic, I find it unproductive, and that's why what I tried to do in this paper is that I noticed that there was so much attention on the epistemic injustice. There has been amazing work done over the last 20 years on epistemic injustice, but very little on trying to bring together and acknowledge this affective part. And the moment you acknowledge this affective part is arguing like the argument your friend is making. You cannot look the one without the other. So it's not an add-on. The affective is not an add-on, the same with the epistemic. It's not an add-on factor or element. It's just, you have to see them as entangled.
Yeah, thank you for that. So a couple of times you've used the example of anger. And of course, there's a long section of your paper where you explore the example of anger in some depth. Let's talk a little bit more about that. Many people, I think, tend to see anger as, in many ways, I'll say a negative emotion.
Right.
Sometimes, of course, anger might be justified, but in general, I think we view anger with a certain degree of fear. Anger can get out of control. Anger can lead to certain kinds of actions, et cetera, that we might end up regretting. Anger can build and build and build to the point where we really lose control of ourselves. So you want to give a different kind of a characterization of anger in your paper, and can you say some more about that?
Right. I mean, I'm drawing a lot from political theory, and so the form of anger that because there are many forms of anger. All of the examples that you gave are valid examples, and all the concerns that you identified are very valid concerns. And I think it's important for pedagogues to take into consideration the risks that come with nurturing or encouraging anger in the classroom. And there have been, there has been interesting work in educational theory in the last few years, also acknowledging these concerns and risks. Now, the kind of anger that I'm talking about is political anger. Anger at injustice, for example, is a form of political anger. And what I'm arguing is that this form of anger can indeed unite students and educators when they all come to realize that they are not alone in their anger. So the acknowledgement of anger at injustice might be something to be explored in the classroom through various pedagogical practices like storytelling, autobiographical writing, visual art. I'm giving several examples in the paper about this, how cultivating resistant anger can forge deep coalitions and solidarity. So it's not that all anger is dangerous, or all anger should, or all forms of anger should be, encouraged in the classroom. But there is what I call in the paper emotional aptness, the affective capacities of students to be properly responsive to reality. For example, to have the capacity to feel anger or fear or sadness when they encounter significant injustices, it's something that should be taken seriously. So this is the form of anger that I'm talking about, and obviously it comes also with all kinds of risks. So the pedagogical challenge for the teacher is how to create the affective environment or atmosphere in the classroom so that these sorts of feelings are critically approached. So they are taken into serious consideration. They are acknowledged that they are part of life, of everyday life, especially in situations of oppression and injustice. And so by rejecting them, it's like committing another form of affective injustice. And again, like you said, there are all kinds of concerns about, but I'm not talking about the immediate anger. And obviously, there are all kinds of techniques that you can't control your anger, but the political anger that I'm talking about is the one that should be valued.
Michalinos, thank you very much for your discussion of your paper. It's a really outstanding contribution to the journal, and I encourage people to read it. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Nick. Thank you.